Dashing. Spiritually
Now,
dashing.
let's see, we'll keep an eye out to see if anybody else comes in in the waiting room. Okay, Zena, come over here. Okay, all right. We don't need this kind of drama. Okay, Dexter, let's have what you're having here. That's it. You guys got it. Good job. Okay.
Grab a glass of water.
Yeah, okay. I have water, I have tea. I'm sorry, I forgot to invite people to partake. So we're recording, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So let me turn the camera here and say, first of all, thank you to everybody. It's really it's nice to share these moments together. I think this is the core of the Jewish spirituality Chavurah, the CJC spirituality Chavurah. So welcome. You didn't know you remember. It might become a more formal kind of structure at some point. But for now, it gives me the opportunity to function as a rabbi in the way that is most meaningful to me. Now, there are some rabbis that are great as CEOs of their synagogues, and they do a fabulous job. I think it was a good idea that we set up this community building model of the four worlds. So now the family chavurah is running just fine on its own. It does not require my involvement, although I am involved. The community chavurah is chugging along. The adult learning or lifelong learning chavurah is doing its thing. And this is what the spirituality chavurah does. We come together and, we discuss ideas and practice and learning on about spirituality. So that's what I think is most important for me to do, and perhaps the way I can contribute most to the community, because I'm not that good at the other stuff. It's definitely the organizational stuff. So this series has given me an opportunity to cover a number of topics that have been important to me. About Musar, and that was an important stage. And then we learned about Jewish renewal. Let's see, what were the other ones? Neo-Hasidism and spiritual technology. Is that right?
Spiritual technology.
Yeah. So it feels like they have led me to this class, which I felt compelled to teach. And I wanted to do it succinctly. And perhaps you'll find some value in it. And I would hope so. But its primary value is for me, I think, because if there's anything that I have to share that would benefit someone else, um, it's like it's like preparing something like a dish and feeding it to other people. People love to get a lot of satisfaction from putting something together and giving it to other people. But it's almost like water in a desert. Like if you're not going to drink it yourself, then can you assume that it's going to have value for everybody else? So anyway, this approach to spirituality is somewhat idiosyncratic to me. It's based on my years of experience and pursuing different paths. And so I know that it has supreme value to me. I'm not sure it'll have value to anyone else. I might hope so, but I cannot really be sure of that. And if it has value, what is spiritual value? But not to be able to write books and to be able to be a popular speaker and have you know, I don't know, people pay honoraria, in the tens of thousands. That's all nice, but for something to have spiritual value, it has to bring me to the epitome, the top of the I don't know, the scale of values in the mystical literature that exists. So I don't know. That's a long way of saying that I think it can all be distilled in what we might call a philosophy of the name. That's why I've given that a central place in the title, the mystical dimensions of God's ineffable name. So it's important for me to communicate that, what that means, and why that's important to me, and where that might lead me. because here, I'll say this and then we'll get on to the content. I was inspired for many years by a quote from, gosh, I think I used it I forget his name. He was one of the transcendentalists. Hang on a second. Yes, Ralph Waldo Emerson. And he said, "Do not follow where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and make a trail." So this is definitely not like a mainstream path, but I do hope to leave a trail so that when you wonder, where did he go? At least somebody in this community will know.
If we remember.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
If I can remember, then I wasn't there.
So I'm really grateful for you to grant me this opportunity to teach what's supremely important to me. And maybe if I make a good, cogent, presentation, it might have some meaning for you as well. But I think it would be nice just to begin. Let me begin with a story, and then I want to do some introductions just so we can all know who's here. Okay? Because I think that's important. Okay. It begins for me about 45 years ago when I had what I call an experience of Ein Sof. Now, that term may mean something to some of you. In others, for others, you might understand it as like a near-death experience, or what's also called a spiritually transformative experience. Yeah, sorry about the dog. I can put her in a crate. He just
likes to bite me.
Yeah.
Yes.
Dexter, come. Zena.
Let Zena do it.
Come on, come on. Dexter's already in a comfortable place there. So let's see if we can satisfy
I
everybody.
found if she can't get in my hands, then she gets frustrated and goes away.
With the approach.
Stumbled on it.
Okay. So I was 18 or 19, I think it was 19, and I was meditating, and I had the sensation, maybe I've told this story before, that my being was like an onion that had layers, and I could strip off one layer after another of my personality, of things that seemed somehow extraneous to me, until I got down to what felt like the core of my being. And I had to ask myself, what would happen if I stripped that away too? And I asked the person I was meditating with, and of course he was clueless what I was talking about. So I thought, well, that's only a decision I can make. And so I'm just going to try to find out. And there was some kind of inner movement, maybe just kind of letting go or something that happened, that in that instant, I felt like my being expanded out into the universe, and that I had what you could call as a near-death experience, a spiritually trained. You read about them all the time, and it lasted only a second, but I thought, wow, what was that? And I had no idea what to make of it, except I knew that I felt a sense of peace, really deep peace, for days after that. I didn't know what had happened, but it was transformative. A few weeks later, I was studying in my dormitory hall with a friend who was preparing for an exam in psychology, and he was looking at a textbook. I was looking through it as he was reading something else, and I saw a chapter on Buddhist psychology. And I might have known a little bit about Buddhism, so I started reading it, and it described it described that experience that I had. In Buddhism, there's no self at the center. You strip everything away, and there's only the void, the Buddha mind. But that's like takes you to the brink of nirvana, and what they call enlightenment. So I experienced that, and I realized that there was something legitimate and real that happened, and that there was a way to find your way back to that. There are practices that lend themselves to having that type of experience. And I made a commitment to myself that I would spend my life, if that's what it took, to find my way back to that place. We can go around, and I'm sure all of you have experiences that might be comparable. Definitely, everyone has had transformative experiences. But I understand that now to have been an experience in Jewish terms. That was like an experience of the Ein Sof, which is like beyond God. It's just limitless, boundless, just existence that's beyond our comprehension. But I glimpsed it for a moment, and it transformed my life. Some people have a more powerful transformation where they're just like a different person after that. But it certainly gave direction to my life, which I feel now after 40 years brought me to where I am. And here's the thing. I think it's taking me back to that place where I can now stand on the brink and look over and say, "Oh yeah, that's where that is. That's what that is." And I've come back and I'm ready to just jump in again. And but it seems like for me, I feel like I need permission to let go and to do that. And I think teaching this class is giving me at least the permission to say, I said my piece, and now it's time to go. Now, I don't know what that's going to look like, if I'll be a different person, maybe not. I hear that transformations can be very gradual and it's just very mysterious, right? But I do see there is a way to it, and I want to share with you what I learned. And it's a little bit like leaving a trail. So let me pause there. And I'd like to see if we could go around. And I know if people were to tell stories of their transformative experiences, we could spend the rest of the class doing that. So maybe if we could take, how many of us? There's maybe like 12 of us here, maybe. If we were to each take maybe 2 minutes, how about that? 1 to 2 minutes. Is that all right? It's to share an experience that might be relevant to, why you decided to come to the class or what you hope to derive from the class. Is that okay? You're nodding. Wendy, would you be willing to start?
I think let's
Oh,
go
yeah.
the other way.
All right.
Very,
Good
very
volunteer.
handy there.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping you'd open it up to everyone's stories. So I think we'll all learn something listening to each other. So I'm glad you did. I can tell one of many stories. I was living in the Haight-Ashbury in the 1960s and dropping acid and meditating, doing yoga, doing the stuff we were all doing those days. And I was also a student at San Francisco State College. So one day I'm on my way to class.
San Francisco State University, right?
Back then it was San Francisco State College.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Cool.
yeah. My
Mhm.
kids at San Francisco State University. I'm on my way to class and I'm looking at this outdoor stage. And there's this dude who looks like a rabbi with a guitar. And I asked somebody, who's that? I said, oh, that's the singing rabbi. This is 1965. And I said, oh, I've heard of the singing nun. I never heard of a singing rabbi. So everyone's dancing. And so I thought, okay, I'll dance. What the hell? I put down my books and stuff and dancing. And then after a while, we're all standing around in circles, holding each other. It was a very diverse group, all sorts of people. And so there's Shlomo. He puts down his guitar and he says, our holy teacher, the founder of Hasidism, the Holy Baal Shem Tov, he used to say that if everyone in the world held hands, the hands would reach to heaven. And he looks at me. I'm one of hundreds of people back in the back row. He looks at me. And I notice that my arms are feeling funny. I can't tell where my arm ends and where the next person's shoulder begins. And suddenly I lost the boundaries. It was just we were all one being with a lot of heads and arms. And I said, aha, that's what the Baal Shem Tov meant by the hands would reach to heaven.
Hmm.
And I'd been dropping acid, I'd been doing Buddhist meditation and yoga and all that stuff. But I never knew any of that was part of my tradition. And what I learned in that second is that experience of transcendence. Our ancient rabbis knew about that stuff, and they were teaching it and passing it on. And maybe I ought to go there. It's my story.
Thank you. You see, I mean, we're on similar parallel paths for sure. And notice that it has its roots in Hasidism, that lineage.
So finding this lineage is very new to me. It's part of me, but I'm only in the last couple of years starting to learn it. But my story, 15, 16 years ago, body surfing at Kelly's Cove in San Francisco. I have a 5-year-old kid. I have a job that takes a lot out of me. I am very much in a grind all day at work, come home, smoke a bunch of dope, and go to sleep. And kind of caught in a bit of like a mouse on a wheel. I was having a fantastic day body surfing, conditions perfect, and I knew I should have gone in, and I didn't. And I got caught in a riptide, and I don't know if you guys know where Seal Rock is by Land's End. All of a sudden, I was on the backside of Seal Rock. Like, wait, I shouldn't be here. And then the tide was going out at that point as well. And it felt like minutes, and I was just way offshore. Way offshore. And there was this time of, it's going to be really hard to swim back. And a moment of, it's too hard, I don't want to. And the waves were coming in at strange angles, and I just kept getting pulled down, and I was making all the bad choices. And then there was a moment of, I saw my wife, I saw my son, and I wanted to live. And it literally took me hours to swim in. And when my feet finally hit sand, there was this moment of like, no, I got to get off the wheel. And that's when my searching really started. So 15, 16 years ago. But it was a decision. I want to live. I really, really want to live. And living is not just an empty existence of doing the same thing every day, but going further.
Valuable stories. Incredible. I do ask that we try to give the Reader's Digest version, because we'll make it a point to talk more, but I hope to get through the
Wendy's up.
content. I promise.
Lots of experiences, but the one that was the most prominent for me was when I turned 50, and I wanted to go to get a blessing from Reb Solomon for my 50th birthday. So we were going up to the retreat center in New York, Eilat Chaim. But before that happened, I started seeing snakes everywhere. There's lots of snakes. And then I was at the retreat, and it was the Torah portion that and as soon as we got to that, it was like everything blew open. I remembered all the snakes I was seeing. And then I found myself seeing a woman under the roots of a tree. And she said to me, I looked at her, and I won't go into all that, but I looked at her, and she said to me, healing springs from the well springs of love. And I've never forgotten that. And I still am searching for that woman under the roots again. Maybe it could be Shekhinah, maybe who knows what it could be. But healing springs from the well springs of love. That was my vision.
Shall we just finish going around the table, and then we'll get to the Zoom participants?
So I don't have those experiences since I've been supposedly grown up. And and I can only think of being a kid, and like I was always up in trees. I loved to climb trees, and I'd sit up there and read and stuff. And I had some experiences like y'all are saying when I was a kid, but now I'm really intellectual, and I don't have them.
Well, I can go pretty quick. I think my first experience with kind of a limitlessness was really the classic drug-induced experience. I got to college. First guy I met was selling hash. I got some hash from him. Then I met a guy who was selling psychedelics. And he said, "Hey, try one of these." So I said, "Okay." I got the day. It was a beautiful day. I don't know, Tuesday or something. I dropped some mescaline and went outside. And I didn't think, it's not affecting me. I think it's fake. Then all of a sudden there was a Nigerian guy outside in the yard, the athletic yard that was near the dorm. He was kicking this soccer ball up into the air. He would kick it up into the air. It would come down, and he'd kick it up into the air. Got bigger, and the air got bigger, and he'd kick it up into the air. And then I realized that, that was it. All of a sudden, there was something connecting me to something a lot bigger, as prosaic as just a soccer ball spinning through the air and connecting me with the sky. And having been a very rationalistic tradition, scientific orientation and all that, it was a real revelation to me, that feeling of connection. Drug induced, but good way to start as any, because it gives you the sense that, oh yeah, this is a real thing that's happening. So I can move on from there.
All right. So do you think we can do this on Zoom? I'm so sorry to ask you to try to keep it to a minute. And I really have to promise that we'll get to share more of our stories. Is that okay? May I invite the person first on my screen, just so I can remember who I called on. Judith, would you be willing to share whatever you like to share?
Sure. It's good to be here with my friends Steve Diamond and Wendy and Aryeh, and Rabbi Moshe. I was at Pendle Hill Quaker Center back in 1991 or 2, and I was earning my way through this year of study and contemplation, trying to figure out what I was going to do with the calling to the ordained ministry. And my job there was in hospitality and housekeeping. And it turned out that I absolutely loved vacuuming for 2.5 hours straight in the conference center, and found that I would experience this state of bliss for, really kind of nonstop, what turned out to be 2.5 years, while I was figuring out what to do with the calling to the ordained ministry. Quakers don't have ordained ministers. So mine is not a experience in like Aryeh talked about in the others, but a long-term, drawn-out experience of the bliss of feeling very close to God and God's presence.
Interesting. It's a great example, and it just shows how we all experience something similar, but in different ways. Thank you. Nelson, are you willing to share something?
Well, I've been trying to find something relevant. And
Zena.
I guess I would just say very briefly, moments of love and acceptance. When I've felt my anxieties and stresses melt away, and so, some of those I've tried to develop some structure or skills for.
Hey, Nelson, we're just doing the Reader's Digest version right now.
Yeah, so I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, let's see who's next. I'm sorry, technically challenged here. It looks like Lisa.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, I can make this really quick. In 2020, I was going through an enormous change in my life. My husband was dying, and for whatever reason, I felt very compelled to delve into gratitude. And so I studied gratitude, I practiced it. I decided to, in the midst of just unbelievable sadness, to look for the good. And I've practiced that ever since. And it's been a very moving, incredible part of my life where it makes me feel very connected to God. And I think practicing gratitude is probably the most important thing that I do every day. So that's really been the transformative spiritual part of my life.
Beautiful. It's cool to see how our experiences and I don't know come out in different ways, and that but we're just like practicing things that are so similar, and in keeping with the tradition that we've all come to embrace. Okay, Suzanne, you're next on my list.
Okay, so my name is Suzanne, and I am, let's see. So what happened to me was I ended up getting clinically depressed, and I had no clue what was going on. I had no idea at all. I didn't know anybody who'd ever been clinically depressed, and I had tried religion. I tried self-help. I tried therapy, and nothing seemed to work. And I had this notion that I really needed spirituality, and that's what started me when I was in my 20s on my spiritual path, which I have found just really fascinating to really explore the steps of being awakened, put it that way. So thank you.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, next is Avi Noam.
Hi guys, I'm Avi Noam. I'm sitting here listening to some amazing stories, but as I'm sitting here, I can't recall any truly transcendental experience. I have, had a dozen psychedelic experiences, and there's fleeting moments of that where I felt it, but afterwards, in retrospect, I kind of felt like that was just drug induced. But I'm here, because I love learning from Reb Moshe, and interested in the power of words. And the title of this class is about was the mystical power of God's ineffable name. And I think there's a lot of power in the Hebrew words, and I'd like to learn more.
Thank you, Avi Noam. I really appreciate your coming. Okay, I got Steve, Jerry, Sarah, and Laura. Steve, you want to take it away?
Thank you. Well, I think my story is very much similar to yours, Reb Moshe. I remember maybe in 1970, I was on a beach in the north with some friends from Berkeley, and I had an experience after the night fell that it seemed as if the shells of reality were evaporating, one after another. And as each shell evaporated, it seemed that I was getting closer and closer to the one. And then everything was gone. And I thought, oh, well, I guess it's over. And I wonder what happens next. And then everything came back and I was sitting on the beach again.
And that I'm sure in many ways that's led you on the path that you've chosen through life.
I'd like to find that place again.
Okay. That's a great story. All right. Who else was next? I think we had Jerry. Is that right?
Hi, yes. As I was listening, I was thinking which time do I want to share? And I'll just tell you that 25 or 30 years ago, I was in Ireland for a while, and I went to a particular place called Glendalough, which is supposed to be a very spiritual place. And I've heard lots of stories about experiences there, and I had none. And I thought, oh, well, that's just me. I'm not a very spiritual person, I guess. Anyway, on the way home was in New York and was at St. Patrick's Cathedral. And my story has to do with the power of prayer, because I was praying, and I was praying for some sadness that I was feeling. And all of a sudden, I could visually see and hear mothers with their hands folded being elevated to the sky, praying for the children that they would never see again, that had to leave Ireland during the famine. That has stayed with me because the power of prayer has been, it's instrumental in my daily spiritual life, but it's also been helped me with some of the women that I speak with who don't have a prayerful experience. And I've been able to share that and know that there is power in prayer, even though we do it in many different ways.
Thank you, Jerry. That's a real testimony. Sarah.
Hey, so I have no idea what this class is about based on the title and description. And I came because of that, and also just to be in community, to be honest. And then when you ask for stories, I'm like, I don't have a story. And finally it hit me. Oh yeah, I do. 25 years ago, when I was giving birth to my first kid, there was a moment. It was great. I had a really great birth experience. There was definitely a feeling during that where I felt like I am now connected to every woman who's ever given birth ever. There was that sense that we were all in this game together. That's it.
Wow. Powerful. Sarah, are you able to come off mute? Oh, I'm sorry, Laura. I'm sorry. I'm looking at the picture of Laura. Oh, hi. Yes. Okay. Was there anything you wanted to share before we dive in?
I'll just do a quickie. I guess one when I was at an Indian sweat lodge, and it was about a year or two after my 13-year-old niece had died, and they did different, emotions or beliefs, and then the fourth round was gratitude, and I just totally lost it there. And I realized I was grateful to Josie, the niece who had died, and then when the whole thing was over and I was just wandering around the grounds, just the connection I felt to everything was pretty amazing.
Thank you. I definitely want to talk to you and hear more of that story, but we're having a little, we need a break here for a moment just for me to put the dogs in there where they belong. Okay, so thank you. Just amazing stories we have here, and there would be so much more to say about that. Go to gallery. Okay. Let me put Zena, talk amongst yourselves and put Zena in her crate. Okay, come on, Zena.
Go to your crate, Zena. All of a sudden you were chosen. Yeah,
All of a sudden
I
you're
guess
chosen
so. I'm the chosen
to
one.
be the blue whale.
Maybe she's having a spiritual
Yeah, maybe.
experience.
Could be.
One of my oldest friends' name is Zena. I think it's funny when I hear him refers to the dog.
It's really interesting to hear all the different kinds of stories that we collectively have been sharing on this question.
That is so true. And I mean, it would be worth to spend some time just processing that. And one thing I would say is that um, these are spirituality expresses itself in so many different ways. In fact, in as many ways as there are people. But I think we come together because we share a few things in common, the Jewish tradition, or some affinity for it and its teachings, and what they have to teach us. And I think Judaism is essentially, primarily a spiritual tradition.
Mhm.
It has all the other accoutrements to go around it and support that, but there is some spiritual truth that it points toward, just as every other spiritual tradition does. So it took me a while to discover that. So I just want to share a little bit about the name in world religions. Okay, that's what we're gonna do for the next 20, 30 minutes, and hopefully I'll get through this whole session number one.
And if you don't, it's okay.
Okay,
Cheers.
thank you. Thank you. I think I just want to just give a taste because there's really so much depth, I mean, to all of these things. And I think maybe there will be a connection that you make that you didn't make before. First, I'll say that there is something to be said about Pardes and how that's depicted in the Talmud. There's a story about four rabbis who entered Pardes, which is the orchard, like a paradise of sorts. And it's a very brief story. They enter, and one died, one converted to Christianity, one went insane, and only one returned whole and safe. That was Rabbi Akiva, wasn't it? And that's all that story says. Isn't that a bizarre story? But it seems to be alluding to something, not just some physical place, but some kind of state, maybe an altered state of consciousness, like a psychedelic experience. If you're not grounded, you could go in so many different directions with that. So that's what I experienced in my 45 years ago. And I feel like my life has been an attempt to find my way back to the garden. Okay, you've heard that expression that Crosby, Stills, Nash Young is actually a Joni Mitchell song. And we've got to get ourselves back to the garden, this ideal place, somehow this special place. So I had I ended up really devoting myself to that pursuit and spent 10 years in an ashram. Now that was during my entire 20s when my peers were finishing their college degrees and having relationships and starting off their careers, and did none of that because I was so immersed in this Eastern ashram. But and it really kind of set me back in many ways. But I did have um, the privilege, I guess, of being exposed to wisdom literature, especially to non-dualism and the non-dual teachings of India primarily. And I didn't really encounter the wisdom literature of Judaism, like Ecclesiastes and some other books that we could think of. But I was exposed to Gnosticism and so the Gospel of Thomas and Sufism and Baha'i and Buddhism and all its different flavors and Hinduism. But it was primarily Hinduism because the teacher I followed and the ashram in which I lived followed the teachings of Ramana Maharshi. Maybe you've seen this name before. Let's see if you can see that, Ramana Maharshi. So You can pass this around. If you've never heard of him, at least maybe you've seen this picture in a bookstore or something. It's incredibly benevolent man. He died in 1950, and he was a great sage of realized, self-realized being. And people recognized it early on from the time he was like 19. But they built an ashram around him, and people came from over the world to see him. Mahatma Gandhi would go to see him. He was so revered. And his teachings are similar to other what we would call non-dual teachings. And there's a form of yoga and teachings in Hinduism that refer to that. So I just have to say that, gosh, I could teach a whole course on Hinduism because it's an incredible religion, and that was really the way I learned about spirituality. It wasn't through Judaism; it was really through Hinduism, and then through that Buddhism and others. Now, in Hinduism, you might not know that there are four kinds of yoga. Some people know this. Now, there's hatha yoga and all different types of variations of the type of yoga where you do stretches and you hold positions and so forth, asanas. But there's three other kinds of yoga that not as many people know about. First of all, there's jnana yoga. That's like the yoga of self-knowledge. It's like intellectual discernment. It's almost an intuitive discernment that can lead. It's the most direct path to what they would call enlightenment. The second path is bhakti yoga, the path of love and devotion. And the third path is karma yoga, the yoga of doing good deeds. And yoga means union. So these are all paths to union, some sort of union with God. And that can be understood in different ways, and it expresses itself in different ways. But in India and in Hinduism and the other religions like it, there was a structure, there was a hierarchy, and that the ultimate achievement was self-knowledge. And like I said, jnana yoga is the most direct path. But that's not an easy path for most people. And probably a more accessible path is the path of bhakti yoga, the path of love and devotion. Now, you find that expressed in Hinduism through the religions like Vishnu and Krishna. And, there's intense devotion to their deities. And then there's also guru bhakti. There's the love and devotion of one's guru. That's really important. In Judaism, we don't see that. We are aware of the problems that can exist with guru bhakti. But there are saints like Tukaram and others who wrote this beautiful poetry, devotional poetry. And we see that in Judaism as well, in fact. In fact, that may be how I discovered Judaism, because I think there's some jnana yoga involved, but it's mostly a path of love and devotion. I think there's intellectual rigor in Judaism, but following the commandments is like an act of devotion. And so I think Judaism is very similar to Hinduism in that way. And then there's karma yoga, good deeds, and there's a lot of that in Judaism as well. So I think it's important for you to know about those different types of yoga. I'll mention that my path was bhakti yoga. I felt strongest affinity for that. And there was one saint in particular that I felt a connection with. His name was Tukaram. If we've ever had a conversation along these lines, you've heard me talk about him. Yeah. And somehow there was some connection there that was so deep that I referred to him and have for many years as my guru, even my Sadguru. That somehow there's such a deep connection there that it will lead you all the way to the end, to the source. And what is the end or the source, or how does it express itself in a living person? Well, Ramana Maharshi was one example. NisargadaOtt Maharaj is another. Anyone ever seen him? This guy? NisargadaOtt Maharaj. Yeah, these are what they call self-realized beings, and it's remarkable to be in their presence. And in my years of study, I encountered some remarkable beings, including the Dalai Lama and the Lubavitcher Rebbe. But these are people who are just extraordinary beings. You can sense just being with them. There's something incredibly extraordinary about their very being. But there is something in India and in many different religions that points toward what we call self-realization, enlightenment, nirvana, and there are other stages of that. But this is the literature of the saints and sages in India and in China, the Zen masters and all the great masters. And you read all these texts from other traditions. They're great enlightened beings. Jesus and Buddha probably were as well. So I want to conclude, well, kind of draw this I'll take some questions, but now I want to come to the fact that the name is also central in many religions, understanding that God has many names. And in many religions, particularly Hinduism, there's a practice of repeating God's name as a mantra, even, often with beads. And I've been inspired by decades by this Sikh master, Guru Nanak. And you can see him in this elevated, trance-like state, holding his japa beads. So, there's a long tradition of seekers and sages. And so I feel that I'm on that path and have chosen a mantra practice, as I had back in my days in the ashram. But I transitioned when I began my Jewish journey, and instead of using a Hindu or Sanskrit mantra, I used the Hebrew one. And I had to choose one, and there are many. Shefa Gold, writes them in the hundreds. There are so many verses to choose from, but the one mantra for me was the Tetragrammaton, the divine name, which is not a surprise. It is for many people, and that's been my path, and that is. There's so much more I could say about that. I think in the next class we'll talk about the name in Judaism. But now I'm just curious to hear reactions, and maybe there's more that will come from a discussion.
How does the name manifest for you in terms of a mantra?
We'll talk about that quite a bit next week, but it's you can practice remembering the name as an object of meditation, and you can synchronize it with your breath, and there are volumes and volumes of commentary and literature on the sanctity of the name and its significance and Kabbalistic meanings. And I mean, there's no end to the contemplations, the meditations on that subject.
Were you asking, how can you say the name?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of what's the mantra?
Yud He Vav He.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You do that already.
Yeah. Tell me, what are you thinking, Arya?
I mean, that's what I've been doing for decades. One breath is Yud, next breath is Hey, next breath is Vav, next breath is Hey. It's pretty simple, really.
Right.
And whenever I meditate, that's what I do. Yud, breathe, Hey, breathe, Vav, breathe, Hey, breathe. Looks like we're soul brothers in that.
Yeah.
Well, it makes a huge amount of sense. I mean, what is it that we're connecting with? It's breathing. Our breathing is one of our essential connecting mechanisms to the entire universe. And so it's I wonder, does it matter what you say?
Right.
I mean, could you say cats and jam are kids?
Well,
You know,
I'd like
it's
to
an
say
interesting-
yes,
It's an interesting
and I
thing.
believe you could say in a word, but for me, my concentration is not strong enough. My mind wanders too much, and for me to focus on a object, a word, a thing, it can't be just anything. And the only thing that's not a thing is Yud Hey Vav Hey. It's like, and bringing my mind back to that is in itself an act of devotion. And that's why the path of jnana just does not work for me, but the path of devotion does. Other thoughts?
I have another thought about, you were talking about Guru Nanak. My first wife was a woman I met in Israel. She had been in the IDF, and she was tough. And I met her, but she wound up being a disciple of Kirpal Singh, who was in the lineage of Guru Nanak. And so I got to experience through her the satsang and the way the devotion of the disciples would hold the guru. And what I learned in that tradition is the guru just isn't a guy who's sitting there with a long white beard meditating. The guru is a spirit that manifests in that person. Later on, as I learned more about Hasidism, a couple of my best friends from the House of Love and Prayer became Breslov Hasidim. And I'm with Rebbe Nachman. He holds an almost identical view of who the Rebbe is. I mean, the Rebbe isn't just the guy who's sitting there with his volume of the Talmud. The Rebbe is a spirit, an energy, a channel to God that happens to manifest in that person. And the people today, some of them that I met in Israel, who see themselves as Hasidim of Reb Nachman. I mean, there's no physical Reb Nachman around, but they see themselves as receiving that same energy.
Yeah, I think Arya, to expand on something you were saying earlier about your mantra of breathing when you're saying Yud Hey Vav Hey, is we get a clue from the Hebrew. Yud Hey Vav and Hey are all vowels in Hebrew. So in of themselves, they don't have sound, right? In Hebrew, it's only the consonants that have true sound. The vowels color them. So the sound of Yud Hey Vav Hey is breath.
Very nice. Yes.
Yeah, a couple of things. One is, I've been doing the Yud Hey Vav Hey, but when I want to get to a little bit more feminine, because that's what I relate to the most, would be Shabiti Shahina, the Negdi Hamid. I hold the Shahina in front of me always. You had also mentioned the story of Pardes, but also in that same kind of teaching, when we studied the parsha involving Aaron's son and how they gave a what do you call it, the strange fire, yeah. And so in our tradition also there's the going out, how do you say it, Shuv and Yashuv? So we yeah,
Shove and Latsu and Shove.
that's right.
Latsu
Yeah,
and
so
Shove.
you need to be able to go out there, as we were talking about all the different places we went in the spirit, but also you need to be able to get back again. And I think all sorts of traditions have ways to get back once you're kind of out in La La Land, so to speak. You've got to be able to come back.
What are you thinking, Walt? I always like to hear what you're thinking.
Well, first of all, maybe you're going to talk about this later, but from what Avinoam said, I was thinking how the name Yud-He-Vav-He comes from being, from the verb to be, and so it's being, and it's not nothingness. And then I can't remember what I was thinking after that.
Well, that is the plan, and I printed off the syllabus for if any, I'd meant to hand it out so people could see that I was following a progression, and that the topic next week is to go deeply into the name in Judaism. I mean, you've probably already been there. You know all that already, all the different things there is to say about the Tetragrammaton. But I also wanted to go from there to talk about other mystical ideas such as Bitul Hayesh.
Can I comment on something that
Yes.
you said, Vaughn? You're talking about being. I want to talk about Reb Miles.
Miles Krasson.
Yeah, Miles Krasson. And he's a rabbi in the Jewish renewal world. He's kind of way out there on his own planet, but he was a student of Reb Salman. And you know how we read so much in Torah, Adonai Eloheinu, right? Yud-He-Vav-He Eloheinu. And the way he translates that, vis-a-vis what you were saying, he translates that as the being who guides us. And if you look at the Hebrew, it makes sense, the being who guides us. It's a totally different way of relating Adonai Eloheinu, the being who guides us.
Yes. Yeah, and you can go on and on with all these teachings and alliterations. But from there, let me have you look with me on my syllabus since I printed it. I think because these are important subjects we'll be covering. You guys can share. And you can look at it, in the email that I sent you later. But I want to cover some mystical ideas like Bitul Hayesh. Anybody ever heard of? Okay, so you know what that is. Dveikut, Kiddush Hashem. Now that's not really a mystical idea, although there are mystical dimensions to it. There's some great stories and the lore of the high priest. I mean, what did they say about the name is that you can't pronounce it, and only one person could pronounce it one time in the year, which was on the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur, and only in one place, not even the Temple Mount, but the inner sanctum of the temple. And even then, I mean, we all know the story, right? Greg, you know the story? Even then, when he would pronounce the name, when he'd go in there to pronounce, they tied like a golden chain around his leg. So in case he was struck dead, no one else could go in there, but they could at least pull him out. So, I mean, there's that lore about the sanctity and the power of the name. And it goes on and on. And then Shaviti, I sent you as an attachment a Shiviti, which is like a picture. It's kind of like a mandala. And it has God's name on it represented in different ways, and usually with a hamsa and all kinds of embellishments. But there are dozens, if not hundreds, of different types of Shavitis that you can have. I mean, each one is artistic in its own way. But I attach one in the email, so you'll see what a Shaviti is. And that comes from a verse in Psalms, Shaviti Adonai lenegdi tamid, which means I keep God before me always. But it's a wonderfully ambiguous verse because keeping Adonai before me always, what does that mean exactly? You could understand it as being God before you, or maybe the name itself. In fact, when people refer to God as Hashem, they're literally saying the name. So there's this incredible, these traditions around it, and they go really deep and wide. But I do want to, and then I have to talk about a few of the great mystics of Judaism. Moshe de Leon, do you know who he is? He's the author of what?
Zohar.
Zohar.
Zohar. There's Abraham Abulafia, and Isaac Luria and Moshe Cordovero. And then we come to the concept of the Baal Shem. I'll close with this and then take any questions. We know about the Baal Shem Tov. I think we did a class or two about the Baal Shem Tov, who's to be considered the founder of Hasidism. But back in his day, in the early 18th century, there were many people that traveled the countryside that were like shamans, folk healers. And each one was called a Baal Shem, a master of the name. And that's because their main stock in trade was in healing people through the use of amulets. They would write God's name on a parchment, roll it up, put it in a case like in a mezuzah, or something that you wear, or you hang over the crib or something. And so each one was a Baal Shem. And actually, there's a Wikipedia article on this, and there are a number who are recognized as Baalei Shem. But we all know that there's the Baal Shem Tov, which translates, it's either the master of the good name or the good master of the name, somehow distinguishing him from all the others. But it's through his lineage that I've come up, and you as well, apparently, and you as well from your connection through the Rebbes and people that you studied. So that's going to bring us through. We'll talk about the name in Judaism and how that's all relevant to where we're going. Any final comments, questions? We got like another 10, 15 minutes. Love to hear your thinking.
Can you say something about non-dualism?
Yes.
What is real?
Has anyone heard that term, non-dualism? Okay. It's the idea that like everything is God, that there's no God and world. There's no dichotomy like that. It's just from a certain perspective, everything is one. And, some people may be able to have some kind of visceral experience of that. But at least it's a philosophy.
Can I comment?
Yes, please.
In the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation, the oldest, I think, mystical text that we're aware of in our tradition, there is a translation with commentary by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. And he goes into some of the basic ideas behind it and talking about non-dualism. So he's talking about the Sfirot. He starts off with Chochmah and then Bina. And the way he presents it is Chochmah, which is often translated as wisdom. He says that's non-dual reality. There's no distinctions. And then there's Bina, the ability to make distinctions. And he says, the way he says it, Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, is as long as we are souls, we're living in the world of Chachma, of non-duality. As long as we have bodies, we have to live in the world of Bina and duality. We have to make distinctions in order to stay alive. And the classic dilemma of being human is to be able to live in both worlds at once.
Nice.
Yeah. Philip, I always like to know what you're thinking.
Well, what Arya said raises a lot of issues for me, in terms of, I think non-duality is kind of the ultimate goal of most spirituality. I mean, a lot of things we talked about is the connection to the one. However, that's what the goal of all these spiritual practices seems to me to be. However you define that one, and people say, well, one is God. That's what it is. If you go into other traditions, one it's more nebulous than God, or more, in some ways, more concrete, in other ways, much more nebulous. The one is, when I go back to the watching the soccer ball fly up into the air. It doesn't have to be an incredibly earth-shattering, the Twin Towers are coming down all around you kind of experience. I mean, we experience the one all the time. A lot of times I think we cut ourselves away from it by making distinctions that are unnecessary or superfluous. We're taught to make a lot of distinctions, but again, as someone who's trained in a very rationalistic kind of way, a lot of, for me, of spirituality is just peeling away the distinctions, really, is peeling away the onions is a good expression. Is just moving to a sense of, what is the being that I am? If it's anything. I mean, for me, there's a real question of, is there anything at all there? I think I'm a being. A tornado, does it think it's a tornado? It has a very strong physical presence. And, if you're in the path of a tornado, it's coming. But then, it peters out and it disappears back into the universe itself. And, I wonder if that's like all of us.
Well, I think having these conversations, especially in the context of these different traditions and teachings, is helpful because then we all kind of are oriented according to the same understanding. It's so easy to talk about these abstract things, and you say one thing, and I understand it as completely a different thing. But we're putting the maps out on the table, and so what I would say, what I feel compelled to say that there's something that human beings have, some kind of a capacity for self-awareness that a tornado doesn't have, and that most other animals don't have, as intelligent, as amazing and miraculous as their intelligence is. But humans have a certain capacity that I think is unique, and that very few humans actually use it, or actually use it to its fullest. And that is the capacity for self-awareness. And what happens in these self-realized beings is when they have it's like consciousness recognizes itself, but it viscerally knows that, oh, I'm not this individual person. I'm actually this consciousness itself that exists independently of creation itself. And some people, like this Ramana Maharshi, when he lied down on the floor, he had this experience and he said, oh, I am that consciousness. And I'm not coming back to who I thought I was. Bye. He left his parents and went to live at this sacred place and spent the rest of his life there. Yeah. But you hear what I'm talking about. There's probably some folks online that have some commentary about this.
I think it's really interesting when I go back to what Lisa had said about gratitude. And because I think gratitude really is a way to get to the masters on the table that you have the pictures of and things like that. They are, really unique human beings with, something very special and spiritual that not everybody else has. But for like the average person who's looking for a spiritual experience, the taking and the going through a day and looking at things that are unique and special and looking for gratitude. All of those pieces, I think, are the beginning of getting there.
Yes.
Do you think spirituality makes you feel, or is supposed to make you feel better? I mean, gratitude makes us feel better. I think it's pretty clear that as human beings, when we express gratitude and feel gratitude, we feel better. But the spirituality itself, being connected with the one, is the goal to make you feel good?
I think it's not necessarily focused. I don't even think gratitude has to make you feel good. I think because you can have a really difficult experience, and when you walk through that really difficult experience, you can see something that you didn't see before and be grateful for it. So I don't feel that gratitude has the connotation of always being positive or quote unquote positive.
There's a lot more that could be said about that, but I'll say that spirituality, I don't think for some people maybe it's the goal is to feel better, but I think it's to come to understand or to come to be to abide in your true nature. What is really happening? What is the truth, and what is Satchitananda in Hinduism? That's like the goal, and that means existence, consciousness, bliss.
And to be self-aware.
Yeah.
Not to just push everything aside.
But I think we all experience that and can live that in different ways. And that's the beauty of our tradition. I think that's the beauty of this community too. I think we all express ourselves in so many different wonderful ways. Any final comments? We have time for one or two more.
Yeah, I was struck by you were talking about non-dualism, and I don't know if you're familiar with Rabbi Rami Shapiro,
Yes.
but he says that, the Shema is like a proclamation of non-dualism, right? Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. The non-dualists say it's a proclamation of monotheism, right? But the dualist says, the non-dualist says, this is saying God is everything. God is one, one of everything. That's what Rami Shapiro thinks.
That's right. Yeah. There's a lot to be said about that.
Judith,
yeah, I think you're going to be our last person.
Oh dear. Well, it just strikes me how a lot of us have had experiences that were peak experiences of extreme peace and bliss and non-dualist, and how we all yearn to get back to that, whether it was like for me a couple of years period, or just this intense experience in a short period of time. We all yearn to kind of get back to that, experience it again.
Amen. Well, I believe the purpose of a community, a spiritual community, is to form a fellowship in which people support each other in that pursuit. And that it is possible that was my hope and prayer, was to be part of a community in which that is possible. And that creates the conditions that make it possible for people to wake up, to have that kind of awakening. If it was me, great, but it doesn't matter as long as it's somebody in our community. I think we're creating the conditions to make that possible. Okay, so I just want to thank everybody for participating in this experiment and in this mutual experience and this mutual quest and pursuit of learning and deepening. So thank you.
Okay, kol hakavod, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reb Moshe.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good job.